I reported my doctor for telling my awful family I'm on Vyvanse. They were livid and wants me to stop my meds because they don't believe in ADHD. My sister's lifelong best friend has been my doctor for a couple of years. Initially, my doctor was a colleague of hers from the same clinic. After my doctor was away on maternity leave, I temporarily switched to my sister's friend as my primary physician. It's been that way since the pandemic began and I never switched back. I have been seeing a doctor because I have ADHD and getting prescription meds for it. I have been on meds for a few years now. It was something I haven't shared with any of my family members for fear of backlash since I come from a long line of type A overachievers who don't believe in ADHD and write it off as laziness. But this is where the issue takes place. A few days ago, my siblings and I were hanging out at our house watching the Matthew Perry and Diane Sawyer episode where he shares his history with substance abuse, and I made a comment about how skinny he looked during one of the seasons of Friends. My sister then, out of nowhere, says to me, "Well, it started with prescription drugs, so I hope you don't get hooked." I was instantly gripped with a feeling of absolute horror. My other siblings were confused and looking at her for further clarification, but she didn't say anything more. I spent the whole night just frozen and with a deep pit in my stomach. Later, when I found some time alone with her, I had to pry the information out of her. She had just gotten back from a girls' ski trip, and when they were extremely drunk, her friend, my doctor, slipped up and mentioned that she'd seen me recently for an increase in my dosage. She revealed to my sister that I had been taking prescription Vyvanse for a few years now. I'm so livid, feel utter betrayal, and have a strong urge to report her for breaking HIPAA regulations. My sister won't stop texting and calling me about it, literally all day long, begging me not to ruin her friend's life forever after years of hard work. She's obviously worried about losing her friend, but she couldn't care less about how disrespected I feel and how my privacy was violated. And more than anything, I worry that my sister will share it with my parents and my family will never look at me or my achievements the same. My sister tried to guilt-trip me and said that she apparently brings in a bigger chunk of the income in their family. My sister keeps reminding me that I'm also ruining two innocent children's lives in the process, which is the only thing I feel guilty about. I adore those kids and they don't deserve that. But I also cannot get over how betrayed I feel. I always keep a safe distance between personal and professional relationships and would have never picked her to be my doctor had the circumstances not unfolded the way they did. She was the next best doctor and was the obvious choice because I wasn't really looking to switch to a new clinic during the pandemic. But I made my decision and I reached out to a close lawyer friend for advice as well. He agreed that I should report it and to do it without informing anyone else. He said it was better for me to do it sooner to have it on record. They prefer any complaint to be filed within 180 days of when you knew that the act or omission complained of occurred. 2 days after that, I reported her to OCR for violating HIPAA and the Patient Safety Act by breaching my fundamental right to health information privacy. I didn't tell my sister or anyone else, but a few days later, I saw my entire family when I went home for the holidays. I hadn't heard anything back yet on my complaint, so I wasn't sure if she was aware yet. Turns out that wasn't my biggest issue at that moment, though. My sister had already told my parents that I was on an extremely high dose of controlled substances. I knew my parents wouldn't take this news well, but they were far more upset about it than I could have imagined. My dad doesn't believe in ADHD and thinks it's merely an excuse for those who allow themselves to get easily distracted, especially since the age of social media. He even remarked that he noticed I was quite slow with my responses since dropping out of my chess club. Absurd and offensive comments. I can't even remember a lot of it because I was frozen. I just sat there, nauseous and livid, with tears in my eyes, listening to the three of them, my parents and sister, take turns going off at me. My mom wanted me to stop all medications immediately, that I'm better than this and smarter than this. She even threatened to tell your professors that you're on drugs if you leave us with no choice. But when she said that, it hit me. I had a choice. I could choose. I could choose to never have to deal with this again and not let them treat me this way anymore. So I did. I chose to say nothing. I allowed them to interpret my silence as agreeing and submitting to their ways as I have done so many times before. Then I went to my room, chose to book a flight, and packed up most of my stuff. My books would need buses of their own to be transported anywhere. The next morning, I chose to call an Uber a few hours before my flight, while they were still asleep, and flew back to my university. I chose me. In January, I found out that my doctor had prior complaints from patients against her, and my report had opened an investigation that is currently ongoing. She's been placed on temporary leave until the case is resolved. My coward husband thought I baby-trapped him even though we are married for 7 years. He is now crying and begging for forgiveness after I sent him divorce papers. My husband and I have been married for 7 years. He lived next door and we just clicked. It was like a fairy tale. One thing I have always thought that made our marriage so strong was our friendship and trust in each other, although now my husband seems to think otherwise. Recently, my husband found out that his friend, Jeff, has been baby-trapped. Basically, Jeff's wife stopped taking the pill and fell pregnant a few months into their relationship, and only came clean after the wedding. Jeff came from a very conservative family, which his wife knew, and so he felt obligated to marry her after the pregnancy. Unfortunately, He also now feels obligated to stay regardless of the clearly messed up dynamic because he feels that he has made a vow and will stick by his wife and child. My husband, for some reason, has been really rattled by this. I am currently 4 months pregnant with our first, and my husband asked me yesterday if I was trying to baby trap him. I first laughed because I honestly thought it was a joke. He was dead serious and doubled down. So I told him that we had already been married for 7 years and that a baby was not going to trap him any more than he already was. My husband did not like that answer and said that there was no time limit on baby trapping and that my intentions were clearly not pure given how I was acting as if his concerns were a joke. He said he had trusted me in the past, but my laughing in his face gave him no reason to trust me now. I did not really know what he wanted or how I was meant to respond, and I said we should talk about this in the morning. I woke up and my husband was gone, but I did have a nasty text from his brother saying that I had forced my husband into this pregnancy despite it having been a joint decision. My husband had insulted me and our marriage in a very hurtful way. I was so confused and upset that it didn't occur to me to be angry. In the meantime, I called my best friend. She came over with some chocolate and was furious when she heard. She called her husband to the house after I had gotten everything out of my system. He is a family lawyer, and he said that he would happily represent me if I wanted to go through with a divorce. Then, my mother-in-law showed up with my husband in the car not long after my best friend's husband arrived and she practically dragged him to the door. My mother-in-law said that he had showed up at theirs late last night saying that he was certain that I was using the baby to trap him. Fortunately, my mother-in-law is a smart woman and absolutely tore him a new one before dragging him to the house today to apologize. My worm of a husband did not look me in the eye the entire time but said that he was scared about becoming a dad and projected his fears onto me. He said he wasn't sure if he was ready for that kind of commitment, but he will step up, as if he is some kind of hero. I roll. I called him a coward and told him that he should stay with his parents until I was ready to talk to him. I didn't want to say anything about the divorce papers because I didn't know what his reaction would be, but he will find out soon enough. I also showed my mother-in-law the text from my brother-in-law, and her face was like a storm cloud. Overall, everything has settled a little bit. A few days later, I had a scan with the doctor, my mother-in-law attended with me, and the baby was happy and healthy. I finally found out the gender. I am having a little girl and I am over the moon. My mother-in-law was a gem and was so touched that I included her in the scan. She is very excited to be a granny. On that note, my mother-in-law organized a family lunch a couple of days after the scan. I was a little reluctant, but I knew that she had good intentions and wouldn't do anything to make matters worse. When I arrived, my husband and brother-in-law were there, along with my father-in-law and mother-in-law. It was quite awkward until my mother-in-law asked if anyone had anything to say. My brother-in-law spoke first and apologized for his awful text. He said that he was swept up in the moment and wanted to support his brother. I explained how hurtful it had been to receive such a nasty vindictive message. He knew as well as anyone that my husband and I had been trying for almost a year. Next, my mother-in-law looked quite pointedly at my husband but he actively avoided anyone's eyes. Eventually, she spoke up and announced that my husband would no longer be welcome to stay in their house. She said that she was ashamed to have her son behave the way that he has and that she would prefer to make space for her granddaughter rather than have some lowlife hanging around. My husband had opened up his mouth to say something earlier, but his eyes lit up when she said, "Granddaughter." My husband had always wanted a girl and he was suddenly in tears saying that he was so pleased to hear the gender. My husband suddenly wanted to touch my belly and asked if he could come home and paint the nursery. I told him in no uncertain terms that he was not welcome and that he had destroyed any trust I had in him. I told him that if I took him back, I would be worried that he would disappear at any kind of big news and that I couldn't have someone at my side who balked at the first chance. He asked me if I was telling him it was over, and I point-blankly told him that I had engaged a lawyer. My husband was kind of frantic but I felt so calm, like someone had put a blanket over me in the situation. Normally I am a big crier, but I felt so removed from everything. My husband said that this was not fair. He had shown a little bit of panic and suddenly I was throwing away our life even denying him his daughter. My father-in-law reminded him that this was the same baby he felt trapped by no more than 2 weeks ago. My husband said it was a mistake and he was stressed, but my mother-in-law asked him how he thought I felt. She asked him to imagine being so vulnerable and giving up your body to grow a family, then suddenly the one person you trust is accusing you of terrible things. He said it was a mistake and he projected his fears onto me. I told my husband that I felt so broken when he left because I had all these dreams of a beautiful family that came crashing down in an instant. He said that he wanted those things with me and he wanted our baby girl, but that he let the panic overwhelm him. I told him that wasn't a good enough excuse for what he put me through, and that he certainly didn't seem panicked when his mom had to drag him to my door to apologize. He didn't have much of an answer other than to say that he was ready now and wanted our girl. In all of this, in all the times he told me he wanted me and our baby, he never once apologized properly. After a very long discussion, the lunch wrapped up and my mother-in-law stood by what she had said about my husband not being welcome. He asked again if he could come home with me, and I told him that it was my house. I owned the house before.
My dad tried to force me to cut my hair, so my aunt decided to get revenge. I have never been so frustrated with one of my parents before, and I don't understand why the hell my dad is freaking out over nothing. I just recently turned 18, and I have 2 other older siblings. I am very close with my mom but not as close with my dad. My dad is super conservative, and I don't agree with a lot of the bullshit that comes out of his mouth. But he's never pissed me off as bad as he is now. Anyway, with my 2 older siblings, my parents made a deal with them that if they saved half the money for their first cars, then my parents would match their savings and buy them a car. Both my siblings successfully got their first cars that way, and I had always looked forward to getting my first car when I turned 18. Anyway, my family had taken me out to eat for my birthday, and we were having a great time just talking and laughing until I brought up the topic of the car. I had saved almost $3,000 in the past 2 years from my part-time job and I was pumped. My mom matched my excitement and said she was proud of me for working so hard. But my dad got weirdly silent, and when I turned to him and asked when we would go pick out my car, he said we needed to talk. For context, I've been growing out my hair for the past 2 years. It's very thick and goes past my shoulders. Girls at my school really like it, and I always get compliments. I take care of my long hair as well, and I always make sure it's washed and smells nice. My dad has said plenty of weird things about masculinity before, but until that day, I had zero idea he had any issues with my hair. My dad cleared his throat and said that I wasn't seeing a dime of my car money until I got rid of my girl hair. I laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but it turns out he was dead serious. I told him I loved my hair, and it took forever to grow and it looked great on me. I told him we had a deal, and I had worked hard towards this goal, and he couldn't just back out over something like this. It seemed like it was the first my mom was hearing about it, too, because she backed me up and told my dad my acting was controlling and ridiculous. My dad said the only thing that needed controlling was my feminine side, and if I was old enough to drive, I was old enough to look like a real man. He totally killed the mood of dinner. I just got sad and so shut down, and we all left. When we got home, I just went to my room and tried my best to hold in my tears. I had been so excited for my car, and he had just ripped it away like tea was nothing. I considered cutting my hair, but I really didn't want to give to my a-hole father what he wanted. A couple of days went by, and the mood in our house was cold towards my father. Both my siblings and my mom were mad at him on my behalf, but he wasn't budging. He said we were all being dramatic and that someone in the family needed to teach me not to be a sissy. My mom also had a talk with me, where she apologized for my dad's behavior and said she would try her best to pay for half of the car. I told her I didn't want her to pay it all, and that I was hurt, but I didn't want to act entitled. Well, I guess the news of my dad's behavior had started to spread to extended family members, and a few days after my birthday dinner, my favorite aunt called me. And I had no idea how much the call would change my life. Update: the aunt who called me was actually my dad's little sister, but she was nothing like him. She had always been my favorite aunt since she had always been sweet to me growing up. She had a really funny personality and a great career. My aunt never had kids and instead spoils me and my siblings with expensive gifts and trips. It didn't surprise me to hear from her after the news started to spread. As soon as I answered the phone, I could tell she was pissed off. I told my aunt everything that happened over the phone, and she went off telling me how sick she was of my father. She said that he was an idiot and bigot and he wasn't the only one with some pocket change. She called my father some names and made some jokes to cheer me up, and she ended the call saying she was going to make this all right. The call made me feel a lot better. Just to hear my aunt say that my dad was in the wrong and I deserved the car made me feel better. I didn't want to act like some spoiled brat, and I was just hurt and confused that my dad would choose to die on this hill. Well, the very next day after my aunt called me, my entire family was home, and it was around 6 p.m. I was in the living room with my mom and my siblings, and my dad was in his office. That's when we heard a random car pull into the driveway and beep its horn over and over. We all went outside, and to my shock, there was a brand new version of my dream car. My aunt hopped out of the driver's seat with a huge smile on her face, ran up to me, and gave me a big hug before yelling surprise. It only took me a second to understand what was going on, and when she hugged me again, this time she said, "You deserve this, buddy. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve the things you worked hard for." I started crying as she pulled out of our hug. My aunt had always treated me well, but this was next level. It felt like a dream. My mom and my siblings were hugging me and congratulating me when my dad finally came out of the house to see what the commotion was. He looked livid when he noticed what was going on, and he yelled at my aunt first. He even tried to walk up to me and snatch the keys out of my hand. That's when my aunt physically got in between us and gave my dad a hard shove backward. She started screaming at my dad. She called him a failure of a parent and said if he wasn't going to love his son, there were plenty of other people in the family who would. She said he should be ashamed of himself, and my siblings and I had to stifle our laughter. When she said he was just jealous of my hair because he was a balding beach. My dad argued back at my aunt, and even tried to tell her that he would get the car taken away from me since he's still my legal guardian. My aunt said I was a legal adult, and the car was in my name and no one else's, and if he laid a finger on it she would call the cops on him for theft. I guess my dad realized he wasn't winning in this situation. He turned to my mom and said, "Are you really going to let this happen?" And my mom just said yep. Without missing a beat. I wish my dad hadn't acted like such an A in the first place, but my aunt backing me up like that is certainly a core memory now. More than anything, my aunt's taught me about what kind of adult I want to grow up to be, and I just feel so loved and supported that my dad's bullshit means nothing to me now.
My husband told me he's sick of babysitting our newborn. Please help. I feel like I'm going crazy, and I've been cooped up at home with a screaming baby for so long it's perfectly possible that I've lost my mind. I'm 25 years old. I met my husband when I was 20, and he was 30. Even though we had a pretty significant age gap, our relationship always seemed to work. I liked that he was older and could guide me through life in a way someone my own age couldn't. He was very smart and charming, and I fell in love with him fast. We worked in an office together, he was one of the supervisors, and I was just a summer intern, but we ended up falling for each other despite our differences. My husband proposed after we had been dating for about 8 months, and I said yes since I thought he was the most perfect man a woman could ask for. I had always known him to be this level-headed, mature guy, so his behavior ever since I gave birth to our first child had been shocking and disappointing to me. Our baby has recently been having trouble sleeping, and I have been the only one getting up literally every single time the baby wakes up. I sat my husband down and told him very honestly how tired I was and that I needed support from him, especially while our baby was going through this restless period. He said that I should have expected this from a newborn, but he would try to help more either way. This only lasted about a week. He did start waking up to comfort the baby, but he just sort of stopped doing it after a week. I would always try to wake him up and ask him to go check on her, but he just grumbled and put a pillow over his head to better ignore me. He was starting to make me feel so alone, and I ended up asking advice from both my own mom and my mother-in-law. Both of them were very supportive, and both seemed upset when I told them about my husband's neglect. My mother-in-law actually called my husband the next day and chewed him out, telling him he needed to step up and take care of his child. It was her words towards him that really snapped him into action, and my husband started waking up every night for the baby and just generally watching her more often and actually giving me breaks to relax from childcare. My husband worked and told me to quit my job when I got pregnant, so I was home with a screaming baby 24/7, and I really appreciated that he had started to take her off my hands so I could have some time for myself again, even if it was just an hour or two here or there. Well, I guess it was all a pipe dream, because after only about 3 weeks of my husband actually watching the baby, he freaked out one night when the baby started crying and screamed at the top of his lungs that he was tired of this shit. His booming yell only made the baby start crying more, and he followed me into the baby's nursery while I tried to comfort her, still yelling. He called me lazy and said he was sick and tired of babysitting our little brat and that this was a wife's duty, not his, and he had no place watching the baby this much. He said that I knew what I was signing up for when I got pregnant, and I was unreasonable to expect this much help from him. I didn't even try and argue with him, I just cried and fed my baby while trying to tune him out as he yelled and yelled at us in the middle of the night. I slept in the baby's room that night. It was the first time I ever felt scared of my husband. I resent him more every day, and I'm starting to think I made a huge mistake having children with this man. Well, it only took a little while longer for my fears to be concerned, but Terry's no going back now. Update: in my first post, I spoke about how my husband had been neglecting our baby in the middle of the night and leaving me with 100% of the childcare. I had contacted his mom about how he had been treating the baby, and she pressured him into actually watching our child more often and comforting her in the middle of the night too. Give me a break. He had only done it for a couple of weeks before he had a screaming breakdown at me in the middle of the night where he said he was done babysitting our daughter. Since then, I felt like I have been walking on eggshells around my husband. I try not to complain about anything, and I am the only one who takes care of our baby at all now. He doesn't ask to hold her, he doesn't change her, and it's been weeks since the last time he got up to comfort her in the middle of the night. Even though I stopped asking him for help, my husband has still continued to show signs of aggression towards me and the baby. A little while after he blew up at me, he started having dramatic, aggressive reactions in the middle of the night when our daughter would cry. He would curse really loud, punch the bed, and once he even threw his phone at the wall we shared with the nursery, I guess to try and make the baby stop crying. It was awful to see, and the way he is escalating only continued to scare me. Looking back, I feel like the worst mom in the world for not removing my baby and me from that environment earlier. It was only getting more dangerous for us, and I should have protected my little girl when I still could. I want to break down and cry when I think back to this night. I can barely think about it without shaking and freaking out. It was the middle of the night, and my daughter woke up crying as usual. She woke up maybe 2 or 3 times a night, and I know it was frustrating, but I never thought my husband was capable of crossing a line like this. I heard my daughter's cry, and I started to rise from bed when I heard my husband wake up and scream, fuck CK. It was terrifying and so jarring, and before I could do anything, he was storming out of our room and into the nursery. I followed as quickly as possible and started begging him to calm down. That's when, to my horror, my husband walked over to my poor baby's crib, picked her up, and shook her like a rag doll. I had never seen him act so unhinged and violent, and I was a mess as I begged him to put her down. He was screaming in her little face to shut up as he shook her, and the image is burned into my mind forever. It was the darkest, cruelest thing I had ever seen another person do. And before he could put her down, I knew I wanted nothing more to do with this man. He was a monster, and after that, I would never see him as the man I loved again. My husband eventually put my screaming baby down and went back to bed as if nothing happened. I took my baby straight to the hospital to get her checked out, and by some miracle, she was okay. I went to my mom's from the hospital and told her what happened. I also called my mother-in-law and told her what happened as well. She sobbed on the phone and apologized over and over again for her son's actions. I contacted a divorce lawyer the very same week, and I decided I never wanted to see my husband again. Because I had a record of a hospital visit, I was granted a temporary restraint order for my husband while our divorce was being finalized. It was the scariest, loneliest period of my life, but I know I did the right thing by leaving my husband and making sure my baby was never around anyone who would hurt her and jeopardize her life like that. I just thank God everything for letting her go unharmed the day my ex shook her like that, and I just wish I could erase that disturbing image from my mind forever. My ignorant boyfriend thought that only veterans can get PTSD, so he pranked me in the most horrible way. I left him. I 18 has been with my boyfriend 28 for almost 2 years. I moved in with him last August, and things have been pretty rocky. My whole life, I've struggled with my mental health, specifically depression, anxiety, and self-harm. I've been clean for a while though. I made sure my boyfriend knew this when we started dating because I wanted him to be able to get out of the relationship if that was too much for him to deal with. He assured me it wasn't an issue. He never seemed to really get the whole mental health thing though. He would make comments saying stuff like depression is just spicy sad and people with trauma should just get over it. He also thinks that only veterans can get PTSD. I've tried explaining things to him but he just brushes me off, so I do my best to ignore him. Recently he started watching a couple prank channels on YouTube, then he started pranking me. At first, it was just small things like putting way too much flavor in my water or salt in a bite of my food. I laughed it off because it didn't really bother me. But then he started jumping out and scaring me. That kind of stuff really affects me sometimes because of my PTSD, and I try to explain that to him. He would apologize but do it again the next day. I was getting annoyed and frustrated, but I tried to let it be. Things escalated last week when he put some noisemakers under the toilet seat in the middle of the night. I woke up to go to the bathroom and sat down. It was late at night, I am half awake, and the loud noise all mixed together gave me a full-blown panic attack. I was on the bathroom floor crying and having flashbacks. After I don't know how long I stopped crying and was just staring into space, having flashbacks. He came in because I guess he noticed I was gone for a while. When he saw me sitting on the floor he remembered his little prank and started laughing. I just stared at him for a second, got up, and called him an SS. I slept in the living room the rest of the night. The next day I sat him down and I told him he could not keep scaring me like this. No more jumping out at me, no more loud noises. He pretty much sighed and rolled his eyes, but he said he would stop. Everything was fine for a week. I thought this whole prank thing was finally over. Yesterday, I got home from being out with a friend, actually feeling better for the first time in a while. When I walked in the house all the lights were off, so I assumed he was still at work, which isn't abnormal because sometimes he works late. I plugged my phone in because it died on my way back home, and when it powered on I got a notification that he sent me a text. It just read "So sorry, I love you." I replied saying, "It's okay, I'll see you when you get home, love you." And I heard his phone ding in the bathroom. That was weird, I thought. I got up to go get his phone and when I got into the bathroom I saw him lying in the bathtub. The bath was full of water, there was an empty bottle of pills on the sink, and he was covered in blood. His wrists were cut and there was just so much blood. My heart just sank. I started having a panic attack. I was hyperventilating, crying, and I was just frozen. After a minute I ran to the living room to get my phone to call 911, and I heard splashing and then laughter. I turned around to see him standing in the hallway just laughing. He said he got me and I should have seen the look on my face. I don't even know how to describe the feelings I was experiencing. I was so mad and sad and scared. I didn't even say anything, I just walked out of the house. I just kept walking and eventually, I figured I needed to call my friend to come get me. At first, I didn't tell her what happened, I just told her I needed her to come get me. She came and took me back to her house where I'm now. My boyfriend keeps calling me. He sent me some text saying he was sorry and it was just a joke. He also said that I'm overreacting and I need to come home. I'm not answering. I ended up sending my, now ex-boyfriend a text saying that he crossed a line and I don't want to hear from him again. I blocked him on everything after sending that, and I planned on changing my number. My friend went over to his house around noon with her boyfriend and was able to retrieve most of my stuff without issue. She got all my documents, sentimental items, medication, and clothes. The only thing she wasn't able to grab were the TV and Xbox I paid for because I'm not sure how I can go about getting those back without him accusing me of stealing them. I'm not sure that fight is even worth it right now. Before she left she put my copy of his house key on the kitchen table so he knew I didn't have it. She wanted to unplug his fridge and all his appliances just to make things harder for him, but I told her not to. I really don't want to add fuel to this fire. Then, his mom reached out to me to ask what was going on. Apparently, he called her to tell her that I had some sort of mental breakdown and ran away. That he was worried about me. I told her what happened and she was so pissed. She thought she raised him better than that, and that she was sorry he did what he did. She offered to help with anything I needed and told me that she was going to make sure everyone knew what actually happened. I told her it wasn't necessary but I appreciated it, but she said she wasn't going to let her son get away with this.
Today I effed up by breaking up with my perfect girlfriend and ruining my own life. The very next morning, I woke up with an intense hangover and just went right back to sleep. When I finally woke up fully around noon, I had one single paragraph long text from Kelly. It was typed out so weirdly, almost in the style of a customer service interaction. She seemed so removed from what she was saying, even though it was incredibly hurtful. She started out by saying she appreciated my honesty, but I had ripped her heart out last night, and she feels like she's been living a lie by trusting me and thinking our relationship had a future. She said I had made me doubt her own self-esteem by the way I was comparing her to other women the night before, and that she would never let a man tear her down like that. I'll be honest, my girlfriend was usually so level-headed, so I was rolling my eyes at the drama of the message before I got to the end. She finished the message by saying it was sad that we had different ideas about the future, and that clearly we had none. She said she would be moving out ASAP, but she would pay me the rest of the year's rent so we weren't tied by any finances. I thought she was acting crazy. I know it had been a rough conversation, but it didn't mean we had to be over. I tried calling her, no answer. I tried texting her over and over, begging her to think clearly, but she put her phone on to not disturb. I was a mess. I started to think back to the night before and all the awful things I said. I'll admit, I went through a really intense range of emotions that afternoon. At first, I texted her, saying sorry and that I loved her. Then after she kept ignoring me for basically the entire day, I started getting upset and reminded her that this was what I wanted anyway and that I was sick of her, and I would get a new chick with a better body than hers. I was just hungover and upset, and I never had expected her to give up on me so quickly. Well, the next few months did not go as I thought they would. After we had been broken up for a couple of days, Kelly came to our apartment while I was at work and cleared it of her stuff. Coming home that day was depressing, and I hadn't realized just how many things in the apartment were hers. She even took the couch, and our place went from a warm hangout spot to an empty bachelor pad. Whatever, this is what I wanted, right? The day after she cleared the palace of her stuff, I made a Tinder. I was horny and excited. I didn't like sleeping alone, and I was looking forward to seeing what kind of girls I could get now that I had a place of my own. Well, I was severely disappointed. I put my best photos up, knowing I'm a pretty hot guy, but on the first day I didn't even get a single match. After about a month of having Tinder, I only got about 5 matches, and it was giving my self-esteem hell. Then one night I got desperate. It had been about 3 months since Kelly and I broke up, and I just needed some sort of attention. I ended up messaging a really unattractive girl who had messaged me a few times. She responded immediately and didn't even complain when I said I just wanted to hang out. I didn't want to take her out on a date. I invited her to my place, and when she got there, things instantly went downhill. As soon as I opened the door, her smell hit me, and it was obvious she didn't wear deodorant. I wasn't attracted to her at all, and if my ex had been a 10, the girl in front of me was a solid 2. I just ignored my disgust and forced myself to try and hook up with her. I kept my eyes closed the entire time, and it took forever for me to get it up. As if things couldn't get worse, I called out Kelly's name in the middle of it and started crying. This ended up freaking my Tinder date out, and she quickly got dressed and made an excuse to leave. I had never felt so alone and unwanted. I just laid in the bed Kelly and I used to share and cried myself to sleep. It's been another 3 months since then, and I've had exactly one other Tinder date. It went just as awfully. The girl was ugly as F, and the intimacy was awful and uncomfortable. I kicked her out right afterward and she called me a PP. I really didn't care. I wasn't even thinking about this girl when I was inside of her. All I could think about was Kelly. At this point, Kelly and I had been broken up for about 6 months, and my life only got more depressing every day. I made the dipshit mistake of stalking Kelly's Instagram, and I saw that she had accomplished her dream of opening her own veterinary practice. She looked even more beautiful than ever in her recent posts, and again, I cried myself to sleep over thoughts of her. The next day, I tried to reach out to her. I texted her a few times. My first couple of texts went through, but then they stopped being delivered. I started to get emotional and desperate, and I called her and left her this long, crying voicemail where I just begged for her back. She never contacted me again, and eventually, I became certain that I was blocked. My mental health keeps declining, and I almost lost my job this month because I kept no calling, no showing. I keep having crazy thoughts. I never thought I would become a stalker, but I find myself regularly driving past Kelly's new animal hospital just to try and get a glimpse of her. I should have never let her go, and I guess I'm writing this to warn any other guys that are in my situation. If she's a keeper, effing keep her. Today I effed up by breaking up with my perfect girlfriend and ruining my own life. I have never felt like more of a selfish idiot. I'm not posting this to get sympathy, I just don't know where else to turn. I feel like I have taken so many steps backward in life just because of this one idiotic decision, and I just can't believe how delusional I was. I met Kelly back when I was in my early 20s. We both worked in a restaurant and were trying to make it through college. Kelly was an animal science major, and she had dreams of becoming a veterinarian and opening her own practice. I was just pursuing my degree in computer science because my high school counselor said it was a good idea. I really didn't have much direction. It wasn't until after I met Kelly that I started believing in myself and wanting more of my future. She encouraged me to think bigger, and try to think back to the things that really made me happy, and make those hobbies my career. That's how I ended up switching to a graphic design major, and actually getting a degree in something I was inserted in. Kelly and became close friends and then started dating a few months after we met. I fell in love with her easily. She was such a comforting, mellow person. She was wicked smart and incredibly organized. Even though she worked long hours at the restaurant, she never dropped her 4.0 GPA and graduated at the top of her class. We both graduated and managed to find well-paying jobs in our fields. We left our serving jobs and signed a lease for our first place together. It was one of the happiest parts of my life, and now I find myself constantly reminiscing about those days. I can't believe I had such a perfect woman and I let her go because of my own idiocy. We had been living together for about 2 years, and had been together for almost 5 years when Kelly first brought up the topic of marriage. I hadn't really thought about it before, and all she asked was that I saw it as a possibility in our future. I liked that. She used the word possibility instead of directly pressuring me. I didn't want to lie, so I said yes, it's definitely a possibility. Yet her question kind of stuck with me, and I found myself really thinking about getting married for the first time in my life. I thought about only ever being with one woman for the rest of my life. Our intimacy life was incredible, but it made me sort of uncomfortable to think about never effing another person again for the rest of my life. I loved Kelly, but I started to get anxious about giving up all my freedom and being attached to her forever. I was only 34, but I felt like I was still young and handsome, and I didn't want to waste my younger years tied down. The more I thought about it, the more wrong marriage started to feel. About a month after she brought up marriage, I decided that I needed to come clean and tell her I wasn't ready and I wouldn't be ready anytime soon. I knew it would be hard to hear and even harder to come out and say it, but I could have never guessed just how wrong things would go for me.